13 Stories is a 2020 novel by Jonathan Sims. It's a modern haunted house story where each chapter explores the apartments of Banyan Court and the bizarre supernatural elements that plague the occupants. Overall, I think the book is pretty good. I'm familiar with some of the author's other work, which we'll get into later, and it has a lot of elements of that story that I really liked. Some social commentary, some strong scary imagery, a mix of episodic stories and an overarching connective tissue, and really creative ideas that I think are strong contributions to the genre as a whole. A story that was an immediate standout for me was the chapter about Jesus the art dealer. The haunting object in the story is a captivating painting. The way the painting is actually physically described is almost incomprehensible to the reader. Jesus brings it into his home, and at first I thought the threat would be something like the face in the painting coming to life and attacking him, or sucking him in or something. But it's just a painting. The curse it inflicts upon Jesus is supernatural fascination. It threatens his life because he spends so much time looking at it and appreciating it that he's in danger of dying of thirst. I love it. I also really liked Carter's story, even though I kind of thought I would hate it when it started. It's one of those, oh no, the AI technology I programmed is becoming evil and thinks I'm inferior stories, but with a bit of a creative spin in the AI's motivations. It's directly related to the way Carter markets his technology as something to let people self-improve. The AI doesn't so much think that humanity is inferior, but Carter in specific. I liked Alvida's story and the way the prose conveys this almost waking dream she finds herself in as she takes borderline poisonous medication and is barely able to perceive her haunting for what it is until the very end. I like how Damien's story shifts the novel from regular prose into a video diary format. Not only is it cool hearing about the contents of the tapes from Carrie's story, but it also primes the audience for the sudden shift into multiple perspectives in the last few chapters. And the story of Jason and Max is my favorite in the whole book. Classic 1990s horror twist with some memorable imagery that's put in a different context not once, but twice. We see things from Jason's perspective, from a quote-unquote normal perspective, and from the perspective of someone else who can perceive the haunting for what it truly looks like in next chapter, which is great. I love it. Getting into the meat of it, 13 Stories is pretty clearly a story about the divide between the haves and the have-nots. Banyan Court has two distinctly built sections that receive different levels of prestige, quality, and general comfort for the tenants. The way each protagonist relates to their position in the social hierarchy and how they just relate to the other half in general varies from person to person. Carrie is a little more sympathetic towards other people, such as Damien or even Derek, but is still very much a have, coasting off of the wealth of her father. This contrasts someone like Laura, who, while not extraordinarily wealthy, has grown to despise the poor tenants, partly to relieve the cognitive dissonance she feels when she has to evict them. Laura falls under the same class of character as Carter, not necessarily in terms of wealth, but in terms of what their ghosts mean to them. Carter, Laura, and Leon have ghosts that are very comeuppance focused. They're out here learning a lesson while also suffering. At first I thought all of the stories would be about people getting their just desserts, but this isn't the case for everyone. Jill and Carrie have stories more about horrifying realizations. They're not really haunted by their own mistakes, but instead discovering some cogs in the much larger machine. I haven't even talked about Anna yet, the book's one-child protagonist. One of the most striking scenes in the novel for me is her watching her imaginary friend, Penny, eat. Quote, "She hoped no one else in the restaurant had seen the disgusting display, but no one seemed to have so much as glanced in their direction. Now Penny's fingers dripped with ketchup and her face was smeared with grease, and if anything, she looked even thinner than she was before. Her bones poked painfully against her skin and her hand shook slightly as she looked longingly towards the back rows upon rows of fast food behind the till. Anna felt a stab of guilt that she had no more money to buy Penny more food, but she was beginning to think that perhaps Penny would always be hungry. She didn't quite understand why, though. She certainly hadn't imagined Penny that way. I love this passage and the way it portrays Anna's feelings about watching her friend eat while paradoxically realizing that she is starving. Anna is too young to really understand most of what's happening around her, but she's still living with this feeling of guilt at seeing someone suffer. Oh, and if you're watching this video and wondering if all of this commentary on society and how people are suffering under unjust systems is like cloaked behind obtuse metaphors, no. no, it's pretty on the nose allegory and metaphor. Leon, the spokesperson for an oil company, is haunted by a persistent and uncleanable stain. Carrie wears a bunch of diamonds that bleed. By far my biggest gripe with this book is I do think it's a little bit too on the nose sometimes with its imagery. And the writing sometimes feels like it's over-explaining things a bit. Like, I don't need Leon to point out to me that the stain on his wall represents the oil spill. I was able to put that one together myself. But at the same time, there's nothing inherently wrong with wearing your themes on your sleeve. To be honest, I probably wouldn't be as aware of this problem if I weren't comparing 13 Stories to the Magnus Archives. Yeah, here we go. Thematically, 13 Stories is very similar to Johnny Sim's prior work, The Magnus Archives. I've made 2 videos on that show, so go watch both of those if you haven't already. Both of these stories examine unjust power structures through the lens of episodic paranormal happenings. But TMA is a lot more up to interpretation in terms of what the commentary is really pointing to, as I've talked about previously. The themes about personal choice and bending to the will of entities beyond our understanding can be read as something relating to late-stage capitalism, or religion, or addiction, or all of the above, or even none of the above, depending on your perspective. 13 Stories feels a bit more restrictive by comparison. That being said, I do think there's an interesting comparison to be made between 13 Stories and the 5th season of TMA. That season in particular was more in the vein of 13 Stories in the sense that each episode had a more clear-cut social commentary than the series as a whole. As I've stated before, I didn't like Season 5 all that much, but it had nothing to do with the actual subjects of the episodes. I just didn't like the way the statements were written, with some exceptions like Strung Out and Wonderland. I found a lot of them boring to listen to, but it is interesting that this book and that season were being written around the same time. And if you're asking the same question I was asking, which is, was this book written, though not necessarily published, before or during the writing of TMA? The answer appears to be the latter, according to the Fantasy Inn interview with Johnny Sims. If you've heard anything to the contrary, let me know in the comments, but for the purposes of this video, we'll be operating under that assumption. I think the novel does a much better job than Season 5 of TMA at using the medium to convey this message about late-stage capitalism. While Season 5 may have worked better as a book of slam poetry, 13 Stories at least knows what it is. While I don't think it's nearly as good as TMA, it is better than TMA Season 5 in my opinion, both in terms of conveying a message and in terms of being an entertaining piece of fiction. Getting into specifics, there is one line in 13 Stories that I think summarizes what the book as a whole is really about, and what Season 5 of TMA was pointing to as well. Quote, "Their poverty, their lack of education and class, it wasn't their fault. It was simply a byproduct of a system. And Tobias had no respect for those who benefited from the system but could not stomach looking at the waste it produced. This world was designed to generate winners and losers, and it showed a lack of character to wish yourself a winner without accepting what it does to those who lose." This is the interconnecting thread that's been weaving these stories together. 13 Stories isn't just about how rich people are out of touch. The book is about how billionaires become billionaires. Workers aren't underpaid by accident. Land and artifacts aren't stolen by accident. Regulations aren't ignored by accident. Environmental damage isn't done by accident. They're done because doing it either saves or makes someone a lot of money, and they don't really give a fuck about the consequences. Although, spoilers incoming, while I do love the idea of all these ghosts overtaking the novel's protagonist to murder Tobias, the scene did kind of walk the line between powerful and, once again, a little on the nose. Like, the book really feels a need to make sure I understand why these ghosts are killing this guy, and it feels a bit clunky, I guess. Like, I think this could have been pulled off in such a way that I could have figured out the ghost motivations myself, because, once again, the commentary is pretty clear. Also, the foreshadowing left something to be desired. Near the very end, before Tobias gets got, he thinks something like, what had he been told about symbols of power? About how they could use the connections if they weren't properly bound or something? And okay, admittedly, I did read this book over the course of a few months, so maybe there's something I forgot. But I really don't think this was set up earlier. It would have almost been better if it wasn't explained at all and the audience could just say, oh, I guess this is what happens when you cut a ghost loose. But it would have been nice if this reveal had been foreshadowed somehow, created some suspense, and made for a more satisfying reveal, but whatever. It is what it is. I think this is a good book, even though some parts could have been stronger. If you like the structure, tone, and subject matter of the Magnus Archives, then you'll probably enjoy 13 Stories. The two are definitely more similar than they are different. In fact, it's kind of hard not to talk about TMA when discussing 13 Stories. I originally had a slightly meaner idea for this video that was kind of like, oh, this is the TMA at home, you know? But I realized I kind of had to take a step back and talk about the work for what it is and not what I want it to be. To not frame my expectations solely around Johnny Sim's previous work and come in with a more open mind. And I guess that's as good of a transition as I'm going to get to talk about the other work of Johnny Sim's that's being talked about now. The Magnus Protocol is a sidequel to the acclaimed horror podcast, The Magnus Archives. The podcast was funded by Kickstarter, and holy shit, did they ever make their funding goal. It's set to air in late 2023. Look, this is a literary analysis channel, not a drama channel, and not a legal advice channel, so I'll link some articles below and give you a really quick TLDR version of what happened in late 2022. The existence of more TMA was hinted at by Rusty Quill, before they revealed that they were making a second series where the Magnus universe would make a return, but with new characters and a new plot. While normally I would give a show like this a 100% chance of probably being bad, since cash grab sequels are a dime a dozen these days, I was actually pretty hype at first, as were a lot of other fans. This isn't some big, huge TV network cashing in on 15 stretched out seasons of their long-dead Supernatural show. It's a smaller network making something different, just using the foundation set by TMA. Johnny Sims and Alex J. Newell are both returning with roles in the creation process, so that was reassuring. They did a good job the first time. But the hype started to die down a bit when anonymous statements from alleged RQ employees made it sound like maybe RQ wasn't doing so hot financially right now, and maybe this really was a huge cash grab that's just going to end up being rushed and pandering. But you know, maybe not. Maybe it might be fine. But then things got kind of dramatic when an article was published highlighting the alleged failings of Rusty Quill as a company. Some of the bigger talking points were about bad communication, the mishandling of finances, and extremely strict NDAs. However, some skepticism arose after it was revealed that the article's writer may have had a conflict of interest and misrepresented some quotes. Rusty Quill responded to the article, and then the editors responded to their response. Links in the description. Basically, it's a PR nightmare on both sides. At time of recording, this is the latest I've heard about the whole situation, so if you're watching this in the future, there's a chance you have more information than me. For the purposes of this video, I'm focusing on how all of these allegations and speculations are affecting how people think about the Magnus Protocol. Public opinion is kind of a hot mess right now. Is this going to be a lovingly crafted companion piece, or a deeply cynical cash grab desperately trying to save a failing business? Is the Magnus Protocol a proverbial cog in the capitalist machine where the workers are going to be exploited for the sake of a product? It's kind of hard to be excited about something when you have this idea in the back of your mind that the people making it are not happy. Unfortunately, I think the only way I can figure out which one it will be is to stop trying to figure out which one it will be. Much like my approach to 13 Stories, I'm hoping I'll be able to see the podcast for what it is and not what I want it to be. It might be really bad, but it might be amazing. Rusty Quill might thrive as a company, or they might completely sink and take the people down with the ship. I don't know, and probably neither do you. At least not at time of writing. I'm sure I'll end up making a video about it after it comes out, because it seems like I can't leave TMA alone no matter how hard I try. So I guess I'll see you then, and we can compare notes. Thank you for watching this video, even though it kind of got derailed at the end there. If you like this video, let the algorithm know by liking or subscribing. Thank you for all of your support in this past year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Okay, so there is actually one more thing I wanted to bring up about 13 Stories. I just didn't know where to put it in the video. And that's that the TV host in Alvida's story is named Angus Merridew, and I just think that's funny.